plan, just like my Department of Peace plan, so many things. Please go to the issues section, and you'll see so many things there, but absolutely go study, please, that whole health plan. Now, this is the deal. You know, when we talk about foreign policy, we need an integrative politics. We need to come at these things more than just on the issue of symptom. So we're not just talking about the military in my plans, we're talking about peace, and the same with health. Do we need universal health care? First of all, of course we need universal health care, and let's talk about that. You know, there was an opinion piece today in the New York Times about a couple who moved to Finland. They moved to Finland because here are two people, they're a young couple, they're doing great things, and like so many Americans, doing the right stuff, working hard, not knowing how they're going to take care of their families, not knowing how they're going to take care of their children, not knowing how they're going to educate their children. Things are stressful in ways for the average American today that they should not be stressful, given that this is the richest country in the world. And one of the issues, really a primary issue, where people deal with chronic tension and anxiety that should not be experienced in the richest country in the world, is the issue of health care. The American people have been trained over the last few years to expect too little. We have been trained over the last few years to say pretty please about things which in other countries of comparable wealth people see as a right. In a country like ours. And also our economy would be more vibrant, everything would be better in the United States if people weren't living with this chronic tension of what will happen if I get sick and what will happen if my children get sick. So first of all, my commitment, as is the commitment of a few Democrats, is absolutely universal health care. Now, for me, however, the issue is not just how we're going to pay for health care. You've probably heard me talk before about the fact that we need to ask some deeper questions than that. And first we have to ask ourselves, why is it that there is so much chronic illness among Americans at a higher level than there is chronic illness among people in other countries of comparable wealth? Well, there are some answers. There's some answers, and this is where America, you know, I want to be president because I want to help America look in the mirror. There are too many things we're not talking about. There are too many things we're not talking about in this campaign, and this is an example of one of them. Why is there so much sickness to begin with? Well, look at the contaminants in our water. Terrible contaminants in our water, and we only regulate about 70,000 chemicals, even though there are 126 to 130,000 chemicals that are in commercial use. If you want to go into a longer story about the water, you know, some of us think, oh, well, they only have problems in Flint, Michigan, or they only have problems in Denmark, South Carolina, Newark, New Jersey. Don't kid yourself. The more you read, there's a very important book called Troubled Water by Seth Siegel that really takes you to another place. Contaminants in our water is a big issue, and there are two things that are particularly stunning. One has to do with the fact that we don't have any mandated infiltration outside hospitals, and another has to do with the runoffs from these factory farms, animal factory farms. Now, animal factory farms are immoral anyway because of the abuse of animals that is involved there. But one of the things that we're going to have a big problem that's barreling down the road at us, and this is about our health, has to do with all the antibiotics that are used in these animal factory farms. Then the runoff that's there, all the antibiotics. We have people who are dealing with places like the National Institute of Health who are already talking about all these drug-resistant bacteria because we have such use of antibiotics. We can't really, we're talking about health care in America, and we're not even going to these places. We're talking about how we're going to pay for health care. As president, I want to talk about how we're going to be healthy. So that means we need to deal with the contaminants in our water. We need to deal with all the carcinogens in our food. You know, McDonald's can't make the same French fry in France that they can make here because France protects its food supply so much more. So many of these things having to do with GMOs, so many of these things having to do with pesticides and fertilizers that we absolutely know harm a developing child's brain, but which more and more and more, particularly with this administration, people are able to make for commercial use. Carcinogens in our food, contaminants in our water, and of course toxins in our air. This has to do with our Environmental Protection Agency and so many of the ways in which there have been rollbacks in terms of the regulations, in terms of things like clean energy, in terms of things where there are plants that just spew toxins. You know, I was looking the other day, the president brags about all the deregulation I don't know why anybody should be bragging about all this environmental deregulation. Regulations, the vast, vast majority of these regulations are safety regulations and health regulations. So ever since the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan, introduced this idea, we got to deregulate, get business out of the way, they're job killing. No, let me tell you something. Some of you deregulate, and it's people killing in many, many cases. So I think my point is well made, that part of my health plan, because I don't want to just be a president that provides health care, I want to be a president that provides greater access to health. I want to deal with the water, I want to deal with the toxins, and I want to deal with the carcinogens. The next thing we have to deal with in terms of preventing illness is the very nature of our economic policies. When you have 93 million Americans living near poverty, you know what near poverty means? That means every single day you're worried about what's going to happen if you get sick. Every single day you're worried about what's going to happen if one of your children gets sick. Every single day you're worried about how you're going to send your kids to college or how you're going to get out from under these college loans. What's the biggest determiner of illness? Stress. So, when they use the term these days, intersectionality, that's really true. Everything connects to everything. That's the first category. Second category. There is now, because of integrative medicine, because of so much more understanding about nutrition and exercise, because of so much understanding now about lifestyle changes and the effect of all those things on disease, we are finding more and more, because of the work of people such as Dr. Dean Ornish, there is so much work now that's going into the statistical verification that in many more cases than we ever knew before. Not only does diet, nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle affect whether or not we develop disease, but actually we're learning how much those things have to do with even the possibility of reversing disease. You might have seen, it was all over the news just in the last couple of weeks, stents that have people put in their hearts. We now know that dietary changes and lifestyle changes are just as effective at treating that heart condition as is stents. So what I have in my whole health plan, and like I said, go to Marianne 2020 and read it. You go to a doctor, right? Now, let's talk about this. Big pharmaceutical companies, and by the way, I'm not anti-big pharma. I mean, when you think of all the extraordinary things that are done for people with cancer and people with illness and infectious diseases, this is not about anti-medicine. I'm not an anti-medicine person. I'm not an anti-science person in any way, shape, or form. But when you have a profit-based healthcare system, you do have to be careful. It is the role of government to protect the people, to make sure that the role of governmental agencies is, as Lincoln said, of by and for the people, not of by and for huge multinational corporate interests. So when it comes to the role of big pharmaceutical companies, do I think that health insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies have way too much of a role in healthcare in the United States? Oh, you betcha. You betcha. There's no doubt about that. And so when you see something like Medicare for All, it definitely deals with the health insurance issue. It doesn't deal necessarily with the big pharmaceutical issue. So we have to do, for one thing, we have to roll back the way the United States has surrendered its ability to negotiate for lower drug prices with big pharmaceutical companies. But we have to even go deeper. Right now, because of all the money the big pharmaceutical companies pay to medical schools, our medical schools, the average medical school gives a much more pharmaceutically approached education to medical students than it does to educating medical students about the effects and the beneficent healing effects and health sickness prevention issues that have to do with dietary issues, nutrition, and exercise. Most doctors you talk to say that when they went to medical school, they had half a semester learning about nutrition. So this is what happens in my whole health plan. You go to the doctor, and the doctor gives you, tells you what your diagnosis is, and the doctor tells you his or her ideas about what medicine you should take or what surgery you should have. Anytime there is a prescription of a pharmaceutical or a surgical option, it is mandated, as per my health plan, that you are shown, and probably be on the internet, that there is actually a register So on this register, it shows for different diseases where here's the surgical option, here's the pharmaceutical option, but here is the lifestyle change recommended, here is the dietary change that's recommended, and statistically, in some cases, you can actually see what are the statistical differences in terms of ameliorating this disease and in terms even of resisting it. And some of these things are very, very amazing. And guess what? According to my plan, insurance has to pay for either one. So we really have to stop with people who have all of these non-surgical, non-pharmaceutical approaches to healing their sickness, but that can't be covered on insurance. That stops now. And my plan is a public option. It is a public option that's on a sliding scale. So there's nobody who can't afford it. Now, you know, some of you are going to say, nope, I'm straight on Medicare for all, the Bernie plan, and I appreciate that. I can see where some people, there's somebody named Jesse Kroll who I see on Twitter a lot, and I just think you and I just split here. I have a problem with that plan because there's an inflexibility to it. There's an inflexibility to it in terms of what your treatment will be. I like my plan because it gives options to the consumer, to the patient, about what those options will be. And also, there's nobody who can't afford it. There's nobody who can't afford it because it goes all the way down to if you can't afford more than Medicaid, et cetera. Okay, I think I said what you most needed to know about the whole health plan, and I hope that you will go to Marianne 2020 to learn more. Susan McPeak, an old friend of mine, I assume that it's the Susan I know, says, how do you feel now about your decision to run? I felt in my heart that I should run. And not easy. It's not easy for any candidate, but yeah, my gut. I feel like I was supposed to do this. What can each of us do to save the planet? You know, each and every one of us has a passion for helping. And everything that we do, both internal things as well as external things, helps us heal the planet. Some of them are internal. There are things like forgive somebody, be a little kinder today. Do whatever you can to be more giving, more compassionate. And in every community, locally, there are issues. State, there are issues. Obviously, federally, there are issues. This presidential campaign coming up in the United States in 2020, you know, we've been saying for a while, people say, well, this is the most important election of my lifetime. This is not just the most important election of our lifetime. This is one of the most important elections in American history. We have a president who does not seem to have a visceral taste for democracy and clearly displays no respect for the basic tenets and traditions of American democracy. And in some extremely disturbing ways. A second term for this president is, for me and for many people, chilling to ponder. So the first thing you can do is make sure you vote for the person who you think can defeat Donald Trump in 2020, and then make sure that no matter who the nominee is, we must support the Democrat in 2020. In addition to that, each of us has our passion. Some of us, like I'm so passionate about children, I'm so passionate about peace, I'm passionate certainly about the environment. I think we're all passionate about the environment now. But some people are, there's that much more passion about the animals. I think that's your assignment. You're more passionate about sex trafficking. That's your assignment. You're more passionate about food and the purification of our food supply. That's your assignment. I think, it's just one of those follow your bliss type of things. That which you feel, your passion is speaking to you. So when you say, what can each of us do? Try to be a channel for love. Try to be a channel for love in your personal life. Try to be a channel for love in your political activism. Whether it's spirituality or whether it's politics, whether it's our personal lives or whether it's our public lives, all that's going on here is the mission that we have to reduce suffering. And there's really hardly a moment that goes by that we can't contribute to that effort. don't know, some of these were crossed out. I'm not sure why. After the primary, also in the 2020 elections, if not elected, will you try to stay politically involved with your supporters in order to keep the issues you talk about alive and bring them to many more citizens? That's from Gabby in Las Vegas. I feel with this campaign that I found my, I wouldn't say I found my dharma, found my zone as though I didn't before, because I've always felt very strongly for the last 35 years of my career, I was doing what my heart said to do. But I believe now, having this larger conversation about bringing in the issues of conscience and dignity and decency and democracy into the conversation about public policy in the United States, both domestically and internationally, I have so much more to do. I have so much more to do and to say. Maybe it will be as your president if you elect me as your president. If it's not as your president, I'll still have a lot to do and I'll still have a lot to say. What that will look like, I don't know, because I can only know what things look like right now. But this is what we've got in front of us right now. You can donate to Marianne 2020. You can actually text. You can text the words contribute to 484848 and leave a donation, or you can go to Marianne 2020, or you can go to marianne2020.com//donate. If you want me to end this game, if you want me to stay in this game, then I need you to donate. Also, remember, I'm doing a fundraiser with Deepak Chopra in New York City on December 16th, and that will also be live streamed. So go to Marianne, go to the events page at Marianne 2020, and you'll find out more about that. Another thing you can do also is go to marianne2020.com, go to the store, and get stuff. And that, of course, supports the campaign. I imagine, this is from Susan Bradbury on Facebook, I imagine you have received great responses to your public meetings. I have. You know, it's when I'm actually talking to voters that they get me, they hear me, they understand what I'm saying. But you haven't broken through the national chatter to take the lead. You are the only one speaking from a spiritual and fundamental place. What needs to happen to get your message out and become a game changer for the election? I feel very strongly that if I'd been allowed to continue in the debates, if I could have been in that third debate, I feel I'd be up there with Andrew and Tulsi right now. I have strong feelings about this, not just for me, but for the country. There was no reason for this. These debates are just a reality TV show. That's all they are. And they're used, kind of like the equivalent of the old, like hundreds of years ago, or 100 years ago, where there were party bosses in the back room deciding who the candidate was going to be. Well, those days are not as over as we thought. And so this whole thing, this drama of the debates and who could be in them, and the polling numbers, and then after the second debate, we know what happened. I'm dangerous. I'm crazy. I'm a grifter. Anti-science, anti-medicine. Long shot, outsider. No other candidate has been exposed to this kind of really demonization, not just like, wow. And it just so, to this day, so many people think, oh, she's the woo-woo candidate. It's been hard. I did not effectively override that. I'm fully responsible for my experience, and I'm not a victim. But I didn't override it, and wasn't able to, and now it's just so in the air, She's the woo-woo candidate, which I think is particularly ironic because I'm not only not the least serious candidate on the level of policy and political conversation, I'm the most serious candidate in terms of policy. Nobody else is talking about war and peace quite like I am. Nobody's talking about children quite like I am. Nobody's talking about race quite like I am. What needs to happen? The only chance now is for you to send enough money, actually, that we could get enough ads out there to make the difference in Iowa and New Hampshire. If I can place in Iowa at all. changes the game. You know, when you look at the things that have happened in other, I mean, I think at this point, Jimmy Carter was 4% in New Hampshire, something like that. There are two different political universes. One political universe is the polls and the DNC, and then also what did me in a way, to the extent to which we've been done in, is it wasn't just that you're not on the debate stage anymore. It's all these other forums that would happen that would be working in cahoots with the DNC. So whether it was a climate forum or an LGBTQ forum or a J Street forum, they would all say, oh, well, we're not going to have you in the forum because you're not on the debate stage. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, what does that have to do with anything? Because all that these institutions should be doing is facilitating the process of democracy, not manipulating or dictating it. The people who should be narrowing the field are the people in Iowa and the people in New Hampshire and the people in Nevada and the people in South Carolina. That's who should be narrowing the field. And so the issue is to try to get in front of as many voters as you can, because it's all about exposure, you know. And now we have, Bloomberg has $55 billion, and he said that he would spend anything. And so he's got more TV ads in 1 week than anybody else, blah, blah, blah. So it's hard to get out there. But it's what a grassroots campaign is. And I'm here as long as the money is here and I can be here. And as long as I'm talking, it's difficult because I talk to audiences and I get standing ovations and people who say, I want this. And so it's painful to live with the juxtaposition of that and the fact that we're not on TV like everyone else and that we're not in the debate stage and all of that. You've probably heard me say it before. The system is even more corrupt than I feared. But the people of the United States are even more wonderful than I knew. Everywhere I go, people, you know, this is how I feel. I feel like the founders, you know, it's like there's certain books, the Bible is one, AA, Big Book of AA is one, Course in Miracles is one, great literature, great spiritual source material, and the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence. You never outgrow them. Just as you grow older, they look smarter and smarter. And I think that we underestimate how profound it is. I don't think we underestimate it. Perhaps we don't consider it as much as we should. How unbelievably profound it is that the founders said that the only place where power should be vested and can be vested safely is in the hands of the people. This idea of these political elites, whether it's parties, establishments, they're just corporate entities within corporate entities. That's what they are. And the DNC, I mean, it's a private corporation, that's what it is. It's no governmental entity. And it's interesting to know, you know, the Constitution doesn't even mention political parties. And George Washington warned us against them in his farewell address because he said it would form factions of men who would be more interested in their faction than in their country. So the problem in America today is that we've been pretty much hijacked by a corporate aristocracy, and these political establishments are just aristocracies within aristocracies. I love it when people say I'm an outsider candidate. Outside what? The whole point in America is that we're supposed to be classless. You know, I think sometimes that if I'd been a congressman, even for one term, and people would say, oh, she's qualified. But it's interesting because all that a congressman does is, I'm not saying all that they do, like it's not important what they do. It is important what they do. But they have to spend more than half their time on the phone raising money. You know, there are a lot of qualifications, there are a lot of experiences in life that give us deep insight into people's lives and into what's wrong with public policy and how public policy needs to change. And I believe now, more than I've ever felt, that what this country needs more than anything is a political visionary. It's not enough to just have a great car mechanic. You have to have somebody who knows what road we're on. That's the problem in America today. We're on the wrong road. So, you know, very experienced politicians led us into Vietnam and Iraq. Sometimes it's people who come from outside a system who have a fresher look at it. You know, we have a lot of people who talk to us about the trees. It's the forest that's the problem. And we need a fundamental pattern disruption of the economic and social and political dynamics that prevail within this country. We have a corporate aristocracy. This has been happening ever since the 1980s. Health insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies and chemical companies and food companies and gun manufacturers and oil and gas and defense contractors. Our government, for all intents and purposes, does more to advocate for their short-term profits than it does to advocate for your safety and your health and your well-being and the health and well-being of this planet. And we need somebody who in there who says, no, that stops now. The capacity of someone to have that kind of moral certitude and moral clarity is what we need more than anything, that it just stops. It just stops now. And somebody who says, as they clearly say to presidents and everything else, oh, well, you can't do that because Big Pharma will be unhappy, or you can't do that because food companies would be unhappy, or can't do that because defense contractors would be unhappy. You elect me president, it's like, just watch me. And I feel good about this campaign in that, with the Department of Children and Youth, where there's this massive realignment of investment in the direction of our children, this massive rebalancing in our national security agenda, so that people who stand for the peace building, which is, peace building is to war what health and wellness is to medicine. You can't just take medicine, you also have to cultivate health. And you can't just endlessly prepare for war. We have to cultivate peace. And you've probably heard me say this, but I'll say it as much as I have to. We have a $760 billion military budget, but we have a $40 billion health insurance, oh, no, I'm sorry, not $40 billion State Department budget. And State Department is diplomacy and development and mediation. And then within the State Department, we have $17 billion that is USAID, and that is long-term development and humanitarian assistance. Then we have, in addition to that, also within the $40 billion State Department, we have less than $1 billion that is our peace-building agencies. Peace-building is a very specific skill set and expertise, because it represents four major factors which, when present, statistically indicate that there will be a higher level of peace and a lower level of conflict. That has to do with expanding educational opportunities for children, expanding economic opportunities for women, reducing violence against women, and ameliorating unnecessary human suffering. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Wherever people are suffering, large groups of suffering people become a petri dish out of which emerges all level of societal dysfunction. This is inevitable. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, whether it's in a corner of the American city and it's gangs, or it's a corner of the world where it's a terrorist organization. That's why, for me, all public policy, we need to change the core principle of all public policy. And this is what I mean by how we need to change from an economic to a humanitarian bottom line. The bottom line should not be, the influence, the undue financial influence of these huge multinational corporate interests whose money just floods Washington because of the Citizens United decision. It should be government, and this is why we need to get the money out of politics. We have too many people who are there to serve the bottom line, the financial bottom line of their donors, rather than the democratic bottom line of what helps people thrive. Because what helps people thrive, that's the question you ask when your government is of, by, and for the people. Oh, if I hear one more time that, you hear on the news saying, well, the senator votes this way or the senator votes that way because the senator is trying to keep his or her job. Excuse me, we all have. I have and you have. We all have times in our careers where you have to make some ethical decisions. And you could do that, I don't know, maybe you make a little more money, but it's unethical. Why should they be different than the rest of us? So if you lose your job because you did the right thing, guess what, guys? Lose your job. And that's how I would run, that's how I would be president as well. I think there are a lot of things, well, you probably won't get reelected if you do that. So what? You elect a president to do the right thing as he or she perceives the right thing to be done. So that was what happened, and we have to decide. This whole thing of the DNC dominating the process the way they do is just one more corporate dominance of democracy. And the thing that's so beautiful is how smart people are. You know, I have a career for 35 years where I've worked very up close and personal with people who get bad news, when the bad news might be that your child is sick, or that you're sick, or that, you know, your child is addicted. I mean, all kinds of, you know, we get terrible news. But what I've seen over and over and over with thousands of people is that you have your emotional reaction, and then people are very intelligent. People are really smart. But our political establishment talks to people like we're stupid. We've been infantilized. So nobody's having the real conversation. We're not getting down. We're not talking about what's making us all sick. We're not talking about how squeezed people are, you know. And then we talk about what are we going to do for the mental health crisis? Stop driving everybody crazy is the first thing we should do. And realize how much tension and anxiety and even depression is almost inevitable given how squeezed so many people feel in this country. Excuse me, I think my microphone fell down. Anyway, so what I see, and I see in everywhere I go, every state I go to, whether it has to do with the children and the social workers that we need, because, you know, we need trauma-informed education, we need community wraparound services, we need restorative justice, we need conflict resolution, we need violence prevention, we need anti-bullying, we need mindfulness in the schools. We know we need people who know what to do environmentally, who know exactly what to do for the floods, exactly what to do for the hurricanes, exactly what to do with the reforesting, exactly what to do with the carbon sequestration, exactly what to do with the development of green energy, exactly what to do with regenerative agriculture. Exactly what to do with formerly incarcerated people to help rehabilitate their lives. We have people everywhere who know exactly what to do. But we fund the problem creators rather than the problem solvers, because the problem creators are giving all the money in Washington. And the fact that we have all these people who know what to do in specific skill sets is part of the larger panoply of we have such genius in this country. We have such ingenuity in this country. And the founders were onto something so incredibly profound that they said, if a person had a free public education, that's why Jefferson said that we should have free public education, so that the average person has the honed critical thought processes that will be worthy of what they need to govern a great nation, he said. He said people have to have free press, so they have the information, have to have freedom of assembly so that they can talk to other people. And what the founder said is, if we have that, then you leave it to the people, no matter who they were. It is the wisdom of the average person. I see this everywhere I go. It is not the wisdom of the DNC. How did that do last time, guys? If the DNC had just not had their finger on the scale last time, it would have either been Bernie or it would have been Hillary, but I think we would have all felt good about it. And I don't believe the president would be president today. I don't believe Trump would be president. This whole thing with the DNC and the debates and stuff, it's just the same thing all over again. And what I've seen over and over, you know, when you're in these early primary states, I see this in Iowa, I see this in New Hampshire, and all the early primary states, these people know how important their role is. And it's very moving. It's very, man, I feel so privileged to be part of this, because when you are, particularly, and somebody asked me, how has it changed since Thanksgiving, because I had said it was. When you were standing in front of people, talking to voters in those early primary states, this is a job audition, as it should be. And these people take it very, very seriously. And they are grilling you, and they want to know about your health plan, and they want to know about what you're going to do about the economy, and they want to know what you're going to do about foreign policy, and they want to know what you're going to do about the environment. And you know, I've had a year to kind of get my I feel I've got it. I know what to say in these situations. I know not only how I feel, but I know what I think. I know what my policies are. And what I realize is that people are very smart. This is what we should do instead of all this, the debate. You know, it's a campaign industrial complex. You've got to realize how much money is being made on those debates. That's what all this is about. The airwaves belong to the American people. The airwaves belong to the American people. So what we should do, and I want to put this in the conversation because I want you to start standing for this, for the future, The airways belong to the American people, and that's how we should elect our president. Every candidate, and this should have been me, it should have been Steve Bullock, it should have been Michael Bennett, it should be all of us. All of us should have equal time in front of the voters. Period. End of story. And what I see is that the voters are very, very capable of listening and thinking. And I just really see, you know, democracy is such an incredible thing because, like all creativity, some of the best ideas come from, you don't know where they come from. You know, it's like Bernie last time. Who saw that coming? This idea, you can't always create things along a predictable pattern. There's a sociological term called the sociological discontinuity of progress, that some of the most amazing things in the world have come from places and situations that you would not have rationally predicted. In fact, one of the things used as an example of this is the founding of the United States, these colonies, these 13 colonies over there in the Americas somewhere. Who would have thought that they were coming up with this incredible idea for the future of the world, which we did, or they did anyway. And I believe now, and I feel this about my candidacy, not that I'm having some unique conversation, because I'm having the same conversation, I don't know, it's the 21st century. I'm just talking like people talk these days, you know, whether I'm talking about preventative health or where I'm talking about peace building, or whether I'm talking about children. This is I'm not saying anything everybody I know isn't saying. But the political establishment is just having this old-fashioned conversation. It's stuck somewhere in the 20th century, and it only treats symptoms. It doesn't get into cause. It doesn't have any kind of integrative or whole-person perspective. That's what we need now, and we have it in every corner of our society except politics. So it's made a lot of people go, I don't even want anything to do with politics, people would say, because it's so stuck in an old model of thinking, which only made politics more toxic, which made some of the best, most progressive thinkers more turned off, which only made it more toxic, which only made people more turned off, which only made things more toxic, and we have what we have. Donald Trump, and you might feel like I'm not answering questions. I've read all these questions, so I know what these questions are. Donald Trump, he didn't create all this. He didn't. All this mess created Donald Trump. He's just an opportunistic infection. He could not have gotten hold of us if there had not been a weakened societal immune system. And that means the cells of the American people, we, the citizens, are the cells in the immune system of our country. And these cells need to wake up. And we need to think the way people think today. We are not stupid. We are not children. And that's what I see when I go around this country. But we've been infantilized by the political establishment. We're just like watching a football game. Is it going to be the Democrats? Is it going to be the Republicans? As opposed to remembering, no, they both work for us. What are we thinking about the issues? Not what are they thinking, but where are we going? And then this creativity is generated. Because like I said, I've seen people when they got bad news. And that's when people get really smart. And people are ready to get really smart today. People are ready to take all of this into a whole different perspective, in these fundamental shifts in thinking that I'm talking about. But the political establishment says no. So it's up to the people what you can do about that. So if you want to see this candidacy continue, I hope you'll donate. And if this is what you want in a president, I hope you vote for me. Okay. With your dedication to children, how do you plan to reach these children with the most need? As a teacher and behavioral specialist, I see the need every day. Thank you. Susan Brady in St. Augustine, Florida. Susan, I hear this every day. I hear it from teachers in Iowa. I hear it from teachers in New Hampshire. I hear it from teachers in Nevada. I hear it from teachers in South Carolina. I hear it everywhere I go. I heard it last night. I was in Salt Lake City, and a woman stood up. What's happening with America's children is this vast, invisible sea of suffering. But it's not invisible to our teachers. No, you see it. And you said, what are we going to do with the most need as a behavioral specialist? I can't tell you how many public school teachers come up to me and say, I was not taught to be a behavioral specialist, but these kids are in my school and they're brought into my classroom and they have behavioral problems, and the school is not funded with enough to help with the behavioral problems. This is so overwhelming. This is why we need a Department of Children and Youth. We need a Department of Children and Youth because these vulnerabilities and these challenges overwhelm the current structure. We have a Department of Education. Well, Department of Education, obviously the teachers need more money. Obviously, we need to get rid of those high-stakes testing. Everybody talks about STEM. We need STEAM. You know, you've probably heard me say it, not only that every school should be a palace of learning and culture and the arts. You know, everybody's in such a rush on the technology and the math thing and the science thing, which I understand, but it's terrible to start eradicating all these arts programs and eradicating culture, because that's also what makes a whole person and someone who has the kind of passion and insight and understanding of life that goes beyond just what STEM teaches. And also, you know, we talk about we need to do that so the kids will be able to compete economically in 20 years from now. Oh, please. Let me tell you something. China, which does have long-term economic thinking, they do already exactly what I'm talking about. Front end your support. I want a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. And I want the Department of Children and Youth because I want to sit at a table with a behavioral specialist. I want to sit at the table with somebody who's about all the childhood illnesses, about childhood nutrition, about the fact that 13 million children are hungry. Hungry children can't learn. I want educators. I can't tell you how many people come up to me at my lectures and say, and my talks, my lectures are now campaign appearances, and say, would you please, when you're developing an educational policy, let the teachers be there? I want a table. I want all these people at the table. And I want a whole panoply of information and data. I don't separate a curriculum from the fact the child is hungry. The child is in poverty. We have 100,000 homeless children in the United States. We have elementary school children on suicide watch, everyone. Please hear me. We have children who are traumatized before preschool. We have to return the art of education to the teachers. But we also have to just recognize we can't continue just normalizing the despair of these children. And these children are citizens, by the way. And even for those who aren't, where's their right to pursue happiness? Somebody said to me yesterday about talking to a friend who's a Trump supporter. He said, all these people want something for nothing. These people are 8 years old. What do you expect the 8-year-old to do to provide for their care? What do you expect the 8-year-old to do to provide for their education? And where are the women of America? Where are we? You know, you look at the suffrage movement. I've read up a lot, you know, about the women suffragettes, and the conditions for women before the suffrage movement were so horrible in this country. Let's say a woman was married to a man who regularly drank and got drunk and beat her and the children. What were her options? Very little. Even if she had brought money into the marriage, she could not have any financial support from that money if she left. If she left, she could not take the children, and she could take whatever she could get into a small suitcase. So what was she going to do? I mean, she wanted to be there to try to protect her children, so she'd stay. The whole thing was so horrible. So these women thought if we can get the vote, then we can change things. And a large part of that was changing things in relation to their children. Now, we haven't gotten everywhere yet. We haven't gotten everything. We still need to pass the ERA, etc. But at this point, the feminist conversation, the woman's conversation in America should not just be how to get more power for us. This conversation at this point needs to be centered around what are we going to do with the power that we now have? That's the question. Number one, we take care of our children. You know, in every advanced mammalian species that survives and thrives, a common anthropological characteristic of the adult female of that species is her fierce behavior when she senses a threat to her cubs. Our children are threatened. And maybe your child isn't threatened, but the love that will save the world isn't just about your children. It's also about the children on the other side of town. And ultimately, the children on the other side of the world as well. So this idea of the children, and also the idea, I want American women to be a moral force on this planet. That's what I want. Just share with me that vision, that American women are a moral force on this planet. Now, what does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. terrible things that might otherwise occur. And two that come to mind is, let's say we could roll back time and they were talking about invading Iraq, which in retrospect is seen to have been, to say it was a mistake is such an understatement. And now look at the fact that the United States is giving aerial support for the genocidal war that the Saudi Arabians are prosecuting against Yemen. Take either of those cases. Imagine a world in which the people of Iraq could have said and felt, and very legitimately, and the people of Yemen could say and feel legitimately. Just imagine that world in which they would have, could have, and could say, we don't have to worry about that happening. The American woman would never let that happen. American women will never let that happen. That's what the world should be. And that's what the world can be. And if we rise up, that's what the world will be. And also, I am very aware at my lectures, at my talks. I keep saying lectures because my career for 35 years. I say things. I've said things here tonight. I say things in my appearances all the time. Critical of my government, because I'm an American. I live where there is free speech. That's the essence of democracy. There are women in this world, a lot of them, who if they were to say a fraction of what I say in criticism of their government, would be hauled off, imprisoned, and possibly worse. We never did hear what happened to those women who were protesting driving in Saudi Arabia. We have no idea what happened to that young girl who put her dancing on Instagram and was in prison for it in Iran. So I feel as an American woman that every time I speak, I'm speaking for thousands of women around the world who can't speak. And that's how all of us as American women or women living in any free democracy should feel. We're speaking not just for ourselves. We're speaking for others who can't speak. That's a mission, and that's ours. My only question is, this is from Nancy Pesky, my dear friend on Instagram. My only question is, are you continuing to shake it off a la Taylor Swift rather than letting the negativity affect you? I hope so. Praying for you, pulling for you, talking you up wherever I can. Well, thank you so much, Nancy. You've always been so good to me. And I feel a lot of people who say, we're praying for you, we're supporting you. It's one thing if people just disagree with you and they disagree with you respectfully. None of us has a monopoly on the truth, myself included. There's that person, Jesse Kroll. I don't even know if Jesse Kroll is a man or a woman, but I see your emails, or Carl Gary, I think your name is, who I've seen there for months. And yeah, there are disagreements. You're wrong, Mary, but it's respectful. And then there are these others who just, some woman was saying today, I'm a con woman. And, some of the conversations, because I said that I believe we should establish an independent commission to review and reform vaccine safety. Well, you'd think I'd started World War III. Nothing anti-vax about that. That's called safety vax, safe vaccines, very different than anti-vax. But I do find most people who do have any questions at all, any conversation at all, are called anti-vax. I don't know why in this country people are so invested in protecting Big Pharma. I don't understand it. Big pharmaceutical companies, we now have attorneys general all over this country who are being indicted as we speak for their known predatory practices. Tens of thousands of people who have died from the opioid crisis. We know the role that was played here by the over-manufacture, leading to the over-prescription, leading to the confusion about the narcotic addictive element of OxyContin and other painkillers. We know this happened, so why are we just assuming in every other area they're pure as driven snow? And that's why these agencies are established to protect us. That's why they exist. They are there to advocate for us, for our well-being, for our safety. You know, where was the FAA when Boeing was cutting corners that led to the Boeing MAX crashes? Do I think there should be jets? Yes. Do I think Boeing should produce jets, build jets? Yeah. But do I think the government should be on it like a hawk? Yeah. And same with big pharmaceutical companies. Should they make medicine? Yeah. Should they make painkillers? Yeah, some people need them. Should they make antidepressants? Yes, apparently some people need them. And should they make vaccines? Yes, because I think they save lives. But should government be on them like a hawk? Yes. And should there be any question in the minds of Americans? No. Because this is, when people ask, you know, and in a free society, when people ask questions, whether it has to do with $4 billion paid off, vaccine compensation, vaccine injury, these are not stupid people asking these questions. These are not dumb parents. These are not people who just don't understand or would endanger children. We all want our children to be safe on both sides of this argument. And it shouldn't even be that much of an argument. It should be a conversation. So to have a president who says, all right, we're going to have a commission, and that's what I will do as president. We're going to have a commission, and it is separate, it is independent, nothing paid for by big pharmaceutical companies. And some of you, and a couple of you have written respectfully, and I appreciate it. Some of you have said you talked to me, and I appreciate that. But I've heard both of these. And those who say it's all completely independent and separate, there's a lot of information out there that says, no, it's not completely separate. And there's some of the medical testing that's not the same as with other medicines. So what's wrong with saying, let's have an independent commission? And some people jump on that, like I'm such a horrible person, and I'm anti-medicine, and I'm anti-science. I think it's very pro-science to say, let's have more scientific research, not less scientific research. So how does it feel to have people take off? For whatever reason, Vice really has a thing against me. Vice has had a thing against me since the day after the first debate. The guy actually called me up and said, you need to just drop out. And I mean, do I seem like the kind of woman who a man says you need to do anything? Really? Really? I think we all have to do what's in our heart. Do you support self-determination for Puerto Rico and U.S. colonies? Well, we don't actually have colonies. Puerto Rico, it should be the decision should be on the part of the Puerto Rican people. You know, a lot of people ask that, like Puerto Rico's just begging to be a state. Well, when you actually read the things that Puerto Ricans are saying, not all Puerto Ricans are begging to be a state of the United States, actually. So the first question for me is, do the Puerto Rican people want that? Washington, D.C. definitely should be, because it's very clear that the people of Washington, D.C. want it. But in terms of Puerto Rico, I've heard both sides. Should they be treated equally? Absolutely. And when people say they didn't get the same help after the hurricane that Florida got and that Texas got, these people are absolutely correct, and it's immoral and it's wrong. Speaking of a proposed United States Department of Peace Building and Peace Games, are you interested in helping to promote the growth of infinite peace gardens along your campaign trail? Well, if you're talking about the peace gardens, like the urban gardens and peace poles, of course. In fact, part of my whole health plan, we need more green spaces. You know, people talk about, oh, that's like nothing. No, that's a lot. We have American children who don't have any place to go out and play. They don't have any place to go play. You know, all of these things actually do contribute to our well-being. And when we talk about mental health, you can't, you know, mental health, physical health. I can't believe that in the year 2019, any of this has to be justified. What's your stance on gun control? All right. Obviously, Second Amendment says right to bear arms, and I'm fine with that, actually. I agree with most conservatives actually on why the founders wanted that, so that the government couldn't be the only people having the gun. I don't have a problem with that. But as we know, there is that phrase in there about for purposes of well-organized militia, founders of all the places for them to be not totally clear. And also we know that our founders could not have even imagined an assault weapon. So what do I believe? This is an area where we need, like all these others, where we need to be integrative. We need to treat the symptom, but we also need to treat the cause. You can't just water the leaves. You have to water the roots. So on the level of symptom, what do I want? I want as strict policies as we can have for gun safety within the purview of respect for the Second Amendment is what I want. I want universal background checks. I want to close the loopholes, boyfriend loopholes and gun show loopholes. I want to outlaw bump stocks. And yes, I want to reinstitute the ban on assault weapons. When the ban was in place, we didn't have all these mass shootings. And yes, I want them registered. You have a right to own a car, and you have a right to drive to wherever you want, but you don't have to drive, you don't have the right to drive anywhere on the road that you want. You still have traffic laws, and you have to have a license, and you have to have training to drive a car, and you have to register your car. And I believe that those same things should apply to guns. So within the purview, I'm so tired of hearing, Bill, you're not going to take away our guns. You're not going to take away our children. Be really clear. If I'm president, you're not going to take away our children. That's what my responsibility as president, and I understand that we have a constitution and that about respect for the Second Amendment, and respect for the people of the United States, and concern and secure the common good. And I know that there are people who are very responsible gun owners. Absolutely. I understand that, and I respect that. I also understand how many responsible gun owners agree with everything that I just said. And we have to go to the root. We have to ask ourselves, and I think you need a president who's asking herself, why are we such a violent society? This is where the Department of Peace comes in. This is why it has a domestic as well as an international component. Peace building, violence prevention, anti-bullying. We have to have a conversation about how violent so many of our policies are. Our environmental policies are violent. Much of what we do to the earth is violent. Many of our criminal justice policies, the way we treat criminals is as violent in some cases as the violence that supposedly we're arresting them for. We have to have a deep conversation about this. And it can't all be things that the government can handle. For instance, I was reading about how many images of violence the average child has seen on television by the time they're 10. Now, if you're talking about violence used, let's say in movies by a great artist like Martin Scorsese, I respect that because that's art. But when you look at how much violence, gratuitous violence, and how much gratuitous violence against women, by the way, is on primetime television. Even on, there's one that's called Lifetime, it's called Television for Women, and it's got so much gratuitous violence against women. We have to talk about this, I think. And we have to think about it. And all of us have to take responsibility. Because there's so many things in all of our lives, including the violence in our own minds and in our own hearts, which is not always easy. So we need to recognize we will have, no matter what we do on the level of gun control, we will have a violent society until we decide to be nonviolent. We need to declare peace. That's a fundamental change. That's the kind of change that has to do with government and its inner and its outer. And it's the kind of evolutionary step forward in the 21st century, which is necessary for our democracy and even for our species to survive. That's how serious we need to get here. The traditional political conversation is shallow, it is superficial, it is irresponsible, it is immature, and it does not get to the heart of the matter. And what I've seen in people whose lives are in trouble, and that's where I've lived for 35 years, working with people whose lives are in trouble, is people, and I've been with Democrats, I've been with Republicans. I mean, this is so not about where people's politics are. people are capable of going deep and getting real. But we don't have a politics that gets real or gets deep. If I'm your president, we will. Dear Marianne, how do we get the media to cover all 2020 candidates? Well, you know, that's, right now, the whole system is in the grip of these political elites. I don't know. If I have power as the president, I would probably be able to do something about that. If I don't have the power of the presidency, I don't know, we all have to talk about it. Figure out what to do. Start making noise. Don't stop talking about it. People realize what's going on here. People realize it. Don't shut up. I don't know how much longer I'm supposed to go. Now, we've been a little bit over an hour. Am I supposed to continue this? Somebody tell me.
Continue for a bit if you'd like.
Okay. What measures do you plan to take right now and in the future to bring opposing sides of this country together? Okay, now listen. We don't all have to agree on everything. You know, this is a free country. You know, and Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. And I believe that. There are high-minded conservative values and there are high-minded liberal values. And the problem in the opposition these days is not between the high-minded liberal and the high-minded conservative. That's not what's going on here. The real problem we have, because that's kind of a red herring, liberal versus conservative is almost a small-level problem at this moment. The problem we have is this corporate authoritarianism, which has become the organizing principle for our society. And that began in the 1980s, trickle-down economics, the idea that government should get out of the way, like this was some great thing for government to get out of the way. And that's what Ronald Reagan began. He was demonizing the government. He said the most frightening words in the English language is, I'm the government and I'm here to help you. Boy, somebody came up with that. Some PR person came up with that. Just really building this distrust of government. But really it was a displacement of power from government onto corporations. And the idea was that capitalism, untethered to any kind of ethical or moral consideration, should be our bottom line. Now, I am a capitalist. I'm not anti-capitalist, because I don't think that this ethical breach is inherent in capitalism. I know some people do. I don't. And that's okay that we don't see that the same way. But this is a virulent strain of capitalism, and it is virulent because it's soulless. That's what a sociopath is. A sociopath is someone who has no empathy, who has no sense of moral responsibility towards anyone else. And I believe capitalism should have a conscience. That's what I believe in, capitalism with a conscience. And I believe government with not only a conscience, but with a deep commitment to its people. The FDA should be about the people, not about advocating for big pharma. FDA should be about the people, not advocating for Boeing or anyone else who's making the airplanes. You can't have it both ways. You've got to be very clear here. They have their own place in the market and they can live within that. But we have so deregulated financial regulations, safety regulations, health regulations. So now you simply go talk about going to where America was in the 1950s and people call you a socialist. I remind you, we had a Republican president in the 1950s who had been the supreme Allied commander of all Allied forces in World War II. This was no out there lefty. So how do you bring the two sides together? People don't have to agree. And I see stuff in this country, there's such a shutdown mentality. And this has really happened. It's happened with social media, and I see it on this campaign. I mean, and some of the worst stuff, you know, attacks I get, I look at the person's Twitter description and I agree, they're the same, you know, resist Trump, etc. People these days, it's like if you don't agree with them, you're supposed to shut up. So I think the first thing I would do as president is try to treat people with greater respect. And like I said, you can be on the right, you can be on the left, but as long as you appreciate democracy, and you're not showing respect for democracy, if you're not showing respect for other people, even if they don't agree with you about things, And then also, we all need to be really aware. I mean, on the internet, people can say anything about you. And journalists these days, sometimes I wonder they didn't go to ethics classes because they just repeat lies. And I know this being a candidate. So I think we need to listen to each other more. And I would try to listen, but with great moral clarity. Whether somebody's on the left or the right, they're probably not where the problem's coming from. It's coming from this corporate authoritarianism. And when they're coming in and saying, you have to do this, because if you don't do that, we'll take our money away, I would stand strong for the American people. I'd be more comfortable supporting you if I heard you say you'd support the Democratic nominee, whoever, and would not run as a third-party candidate. Absolutely. I'm supporting the Democratic nominee, whether it's me or anyone else, and I've said this many, many times. Though I am pro-life, I staunchly support your candidacy because I understand a woman's plight. But many people disregard you and your message because of your pro-choice stance. Do you see it a way to resolve this divide? I believe that abortion is a moral issue. I believe it's a very serious moral issue, but I believe that it is a private moral issue. And I don't believe that the U.S. government has any right to hone in on a person's private moral decisions. And I have faith in the moral decision-making of the American woman. And I believe strongly, I mean, my whole campaign is based on a return of public morality. But when it comes to private morality, I just don't think the government has any right to tell a woman the choice that she has to make about that. And you know, Clinton used to say safe, legal, and rare about abortions. And then people, actually, it was people on the left who got all upset with that they don't like that. But actually, I do. I don't see anything wrong with that. That's how I feel about abortion. Any plans to come back to Yale? I'd like to come back to Yale. That was a fun night. I've heard many people say they think you're smart and an outstanding speaker, but they don't think you're electable. Now, we can talk about that one. So this is from Reverend Christine Haggerty. Okay. So are they talking about I'm not electable for the nominee, or I'm not electable against Trump? Electable as a nominee, I would be as electable as that's called the voters voting. I mean, if everybody who said to me, I'd love to have you, but I don't think you can win, voted for me, you know, the Trump voters just voted for what they wanted. They didn't care that the RNC said it has to be Scott Walker, Ted Cruz, or Jeb Bush. They voted for who they wanted. But the Democrats on say, ooh, the DNC, the DNC. And like I said, the narrative that's created, because not only the debate stage, but also the forums. So people should just vote their conscience. In terms of against Trump, I'm the most electable, I think. He's not just a politician, guys. He's a phenomenon. And we need a phenomenon of equal emotional, psychological intensity in order to override him and to win in 2020. That's not a human being. It's an arousing of consciousness. It's an energy and an emotional fervor among the American people. That's what was lacking on our side in the last election. So, you know, all of the Democratic candidates are telling the truth. But when you go into a court of law, you raise your hand and you swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. We need to do more than tell the truth. And I hope that you feel that some of what you've heard here tonight and in my talks, we're talking some deeper truths. We need to get real. We need to get real about criminal sentencing. We need to get real about needing to take away mandatory minimum sentences. We need to talk about racial disparity in criminal sentencing. We need to talk about mass incarceration. We need to talk about what's happening with the American child. We need to talk about poverty in the United States. We need to talk about hunger in the United States. We need to talk about cultivating peace as well as being prepared for war. We need to talk about a mass mobilization of climate change and the fact we need to do this within 7 years. We need to have a conversation that is so big And it's so real. We need some radical truth-telling. Only radical, deep-level truth-telling is going to be able to override the radical and outrageous lies that will be coming at us next year. And, you know, I suppose every candidate, I think, thinks they're the one. And they should. I mean, you know, otherwise, why would you get up in the morning and be a candidate unless you thought you could beat him and you thought you'd be the best president? I respect that. But I feel it too. And I think the idea that I'm not electable, what is that about exactly? It means I'm not electable because the DNC, you know, and everybody has started the stories about me to make people think I'm a wacky, crazy woman? Or do you mean not electable against Donald Trump? I think for those who wish to support me, it's coming from a place of she's the most electable. That's what I think. What do I think of Andrew Yang? I love Andrew. Do you support it? We already talked about Puerto Rico. Will you come to visit the UK? Yeah, absolutely. I think we're probably, I'll do a little bit more. You're probably tired. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. What's your favorite thing about running for president so far? The people. The people that you meet. It's just, people are wonderful. And then there's the other side of it, you know, the press sometimes and that. But the people are wonderful. I mean, I see so many things crossed out because all these things, when I see it crossed out, it's that somebody else had already asked that question. Animal rights. We've got to get rid of the animal factory farms. They're so immoral. They're so cruel. They're so terrible. And they're horrible for farming, and they're horrible for the water, and they're horrible for the land, and they're horrible for the animals. They're horrible for our health. All the antibiotics that those animals are being fed, growth hormones, all that. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Out. I think they should be banned. I love this one, Department of Children and Youth. Will you allow actual children to be part of decision making? Will you allow children to vote on decisions that affect them, have a say in something? We're running their lives to a point it's crippling them. I agree with that, and I also propose lowering the voter age. We should lower the voting age at least to 17. I've even thought 16 was a decent idea, but I could say, let's just say 17 for now. These kids, first of all, it's their future. And secondly, this whole issue of gun violence, the idea that nobody who's in high school should have a chance to weigh in on this, no. I would want that like immediately. Let's lower the voting age. And in terms of the children and youth, I love the idea of talking to children and finding out more from kids themselves. I think that's a beautiful idea. Thank you for presenting it to me. Do you have a position on the legalization or regulation of sex work? You know, going to Las Vegas as much as I have on this campaign has changed my thinking a little in that I see both sides now. I used to think, well, oh, of course it should be legalized. And then you go to a place like Las Vegas where it is legal and you hear a lot of people there talking about it. This is something where I would want to talk to a lot of people. I would want to talk to, I would probably start in Las Vegas. And I want to hear from a lot more people. I've heard from a lot of people, but what I've heard from has made me see both sides. I want to hear from more people, and that's what I would do as president. Many Native American indigenous leaders are opposed to a universal health care system, concerned of what it might mean. That's my point with my plan, because it shouldn't be so rigid. So I understand that concern, and they would not have that concern with my health plan. All these are good ideas. These are just ideas that people send. And also things I've already answered. Of the current DNC candidates, which would be your running mate if you win? I think if I were the nominee, then somebody who is a U.S. Senator or a U.S. Congressperson should be my vice president, because I don't have that experience, and I think it should be somebody who does. Would you work in the Trump White House if he offered you a position that allowed you to do some of what you're wanting to do? Let's not kid ourselves. Anybody who has worked for the White House thinking they could do that has been pretty much chewed up and spit out. No matter what happens, he's not going to spit up and chew out me. What did I say? Chew out and spit out? He's not going to chew up and spit out me. What a time we're living in, huh? On the anniversary of John Lennon's death, which is today, what can we carry forward from his music and his life that might help us today? I want to imagine a world. This is what I want. And this is so in keeping with John Lennon. Remember we used to sing, "Give Peace a Chance." By the way, you can't see it, but on my wall here I have a photograph of John Lennon. John F. Kennedy said that if mankind does not put an end to war, the war will put an end to us, put an end to mankind. What I want us to imagine is the world at the end of this century, which most of us will not be around to see. But you know, just like no individual should live only for themselves, no generation should live only for itself. And I think we should imagine a world at the end of this century in which maybe war is not completely eradicated, but where the people of the world can see we're on our way, we're on track. Because the people of the world have come into a consensus and an understanding. You know, until the 20th century, there was not even a consensus that genocide should not exist. Now, it still exists, unfortunately, in places, but at least we formed that it should not exist. And we can imagine a world and build towards a consensus that the world should be at peace. I heard Dennis Kucinich say once, we should challenge the idea that war is inevitable. And we must. We cannot continue like this. The human race will not survive. You can't just say, okay, we're going to handle Kim Jong-un. We're going to handle Iran. Someday, something is going to happen. We have to start to learn to wage peace. Even Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense under George Bush, said that. They will have, within decades, maybe even sooner, people will have like a little something on their wristwatch with which they could, drop a nuke. We must wage peace. So that's what I imagine. I imagine a world, and I imagine an effort, and the United States should be leading this. I mean, it's crazy. It's like when the United States, out of 195 nations, we withdrew from the Paris Accord. We're not only not a leader anymore, we're the opposites. No, the United States should lead the effort. I would love to be at the United Nations talking about this. That we imagine a world at the end of this century, just like John F. Kennedy said, we're going to land a man on the moon within this decade. I want to say we're going to have peace on this earth by the end of this century. And the United States should help lead the way. That's my thoughts about John Lennon today. Now, I must say to Lauren, do you know that this red light is blinking?
Yes, and that is.
What does that mean?
That is fine. It's still going. It's still recording.
Okay. Okay. These are all, would I give path to citizenship to dreamers? Absolutely. And not only to dreamers, but to many, 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 like millions more people as well. I think so many of these things, what's the first thing to do in order to start peace building? Establish the Department of Peace, bring together. See, a lot of the peace building talents, many people already work within the government, like within the State Department, people who are in the peace building agencies. And many, many people all over the country. I want to have a big convention. I want all the peace builders to come. I want to have a big meeting. I want to hear from everybody. And then start figuring out how we put this together. A lot of it is already stuff happening within the government. A lot of it is, I mentioned to you earlier, we fund the problem creators. We don't fund the problem solvers. I meet people all over the world, all over the country who do such great work. But like, for instance, the people who help with children. Who talk about how they rescue so many of these children, and I'll say, of the people in your district or your state who need help, how many do you think you were able to reach? And I'm told consistently, maybe 10 or 15%. What is the first thing you would say to Trump? I would say, hello, Mr. President. Show him with respect. He's a human being, and I have respect for the office. So I think thoughts on DACA? Absolutely. Immediate citizenship. And for their family. Guys, can we talk about this? Ronald Reagan gave 8 million people amnesty. Ronald Reagan gave 8 million people amnesty. Before 1973, if you were an undocumented person, all you had to do was walk over to the registry office. What are we doing here? I want to end an aberrational chapter in American history and begin a new one. I would give amnesty to several million people. Just amnesty. Just people who have been living here. So the vast, vast, vast majority of undocumented people have paid taxes and work hard and contribute to this society. On the average immigrant does so much more to contribute to this society than the society has done to contribute to the immigrant. This demonization of the immigrant is one of the worst things. My father was an immigration lawyer. My brother is an immigration lawyer. All 4 of my grandparents came through Ellis Island. So I don't know who we think we are, but God just... You know, we have this thing in the United States, rugged individualism, and that's a good thing, rugged individualism. A lot of creativity and genius comes from that. But in too many cases, rugged individualism is turned into rugged narcissism. Do we or do we not owe each other anything? I believe we do. Love one another. That's the highest law, remember? And that should apply to public policy as much as to individual behavior. Yes, I think that the college loan debt, we could remove 95% of that. This is the thing. Like I said before, help people thrive. That's why we should have universal health care. That's why we should have free college, and that should include technical schools and mentorship programs and apprenticeship programs. That's why we should remove the college loan debt. Why? So that people can soar. That's where peace comes from, when people have the space to breathe, to be, to build relationships, to live their dreams. We have public policy that does more to thwart people in living their dreams than to support people in living their dreams. If you want money, help people thrive. We have millions of people who are jobs they hate, but that's the job they have to be in because that's where they get the benefits. We have young people who are not... Where do you think abundance and prosperity comes from? It comes from people living their dreams, starting their businesses, creating their projects. And we have all these young people today, millions of them. They're not going after the career path that their heart says calls them to. Why? Because if they do that, they think the risk is too great, they won't be able to pay these college loans. I met a woman the other day in New Hampshire. She certainly looked at least 50 to me, and she still pays $400 a month on these college loans. Like, at what age are we supposed to be able to relax? And yes, that's where mental issues come from, and yes, that's where emotional issues come from, and yes, that's where even physical issues come from. People living like this. That's not what the resources of this government should be. The resources of this government should belong to its people. That's not socialism. That's just a country in which a government is dedicated to its people, of, by, and for the people. Have you read the Mueller report? No, I read it kind of like a Cliff Notes version. Didn't read the whole thing. Please break down your apprehension towards nuclear energy. Okay, I get it. I understand that Germany had to go back on some use because they couldn't meet the Paris Accords without it. You know, I grew up in a generation where we did protest ban the bomb. The smallest nuclear bomb in this country today makes Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like a pinprick. And then people would say, Marianne, we're not talking about nuclear bombs, we're talking about nuclear energy. Stop it with the nuclear bombs. We're talking about nuclear energy in these places. These things are safe. I don't even think today we're totally sure everything that happened in Fukushima. I think there's a real blackout, real news blackout. One mistake, one earthquake, one tsunami. It is impossible. Humanity is incapable of building anything that is absolutely without vulnerability to the forces of nature if nature decides to get mad. And with everything that we've been doing with the environment, it is reasonable to assume that some things are coming at us. That's my apprehension. That's my apprehension. What equips you to discuss military decisions and negotiate with world leaders regarding war or threats of war? More women and children died in the 20th century in war than did combatants. So the idea that a woman, what, I don't have what it takes, what equips me? For that matter, congressmen and senators, governors, what do you think equips them? I have traveled in my profession all over the world. Now, Hillary Clinton, I could see you saying that about her because she'd been Secretary of State. Most of these people haven't had any more international experience than I've had to deal with world leaders. I have had more experience dealing with world leaders. I have worked internationally, not only traveled internationally, but worked internationally with very, very high-level people, high-level professional people, and in some cases in their parliament speaking. Yeah. There's this Wizard of Oz quality that we have about our politicians. Like, they know things that the rest of us don't know. Actually, they don't. Now, the exception to that would be Biden. Biden has certainly had experience in all of that, although I disagree with him about some other things, although he's a very lovely man. I've had plenty of experience, and I have moral certitude, and I'm committed to the United States being a world leader with moral authority back in our affairs internationally. In fact, I can only think of one other candidate who's even talked about international affairs as much as I have. And the erosion of our moral authority is a huge deal. I had the honor of meeting the Dalai Lama, and he said to me that the people of the world do not see the United States as a great champion of democracy. This is huge, as is evidenced by our support for, our giving aerial support for the sake of $360 billion in arms sale to Saudi Arabia in that genocidal war against Yemen. All right, I'm going to take a couple more, and then you're probably tired. It's been an hour and a half, so. Marianne, you're leading a paradigm shift in our human potential, but our current governance and political system doesn't seem ready for the deep enlightenment you offer. How can we all help turn around this dire situation as we face the climate crisis? Go to Marianne 2020. Donate what you can. Do what you can. Help us make it through. And as far as the climate crisis is concerned, we need to take radical action in the next 7 years. You know, people talk about, is this just man-made, is it cyclical, or is it not man-made? It doesn't matter. What matters is where we are, what we have to do, regardless of what we see as the genesis of the problem. We have 7 years, we have to do this. We have to sequester the carbon, we have to reforest, we have to develop, we need a Green New Deal type development of green energy and a transformation from dirty economy to a clean economy. Solar, wind, transportation, power grids, buildings. We got to do it, we got to do it, we got to do it. And we've got to do it fast. And if we do not do it, we could have within the next 20 years a level of massive social collapse. I don't even think most people really hear what that means, unlike anything we've seen in the modern era. We could have whole swaths of countries, possibly continents, that are literally uninhabitable because of the heat. And if it's uninhabitable because of the heat, you can't grow food there. If you can't grow food there, that means people, you know, you're going to talk about massive food shortages, economic collapse, and what could be hundreds of millions of climate refugees. We already have a climate refugee problem on this earth greater than anything since World War II, 63 million displaced persons. You know what's happening at the southern border right now. So imagine hundreds of millions of people with nowhere to go. How would governments start responding to this? We got to get busy. We got to get busy now. But see, this is the thing. Americans are hardwired for great things. I don't think people are tired because they're doing too much. I think people are tired because we're not doing anything that's important. That's what tires you out. Just doing meaningless things. When you're doing something big and important, it inspires you. We are hardwired for big things. And I feel that as president, I could say we're going to do this, and we're going to do it within 7 years, and we're all going to work together, and this is not going to be Democrats versus Republicans. We're doing this for our great-grandchildren. And those industries that have done industrial scale harm are needed now to help us do industrial scale repair. And the thousands of people whose jobs now are involved in some of those industries that must transition now, we're going to transition carefully. We're going to transition respectfully. These industries are going to be part of the transition because your president is going to enroll them in that. There's just as much money is going to be made, in many cases more. I mean, how we can afford it. How can we afford these hurricanes? How can we afford these storms? How can we afford these floods? And we need a president who can inspire the people and make sure that this, as they call it, just transition can be handled in such a way that everybody will know the government has their back. We can do this. Other generations have done great things. They abolished slavery. They gave women the right to vote. They dismantled segregation. It's our turn now. It is our turn now. And we too can rise to the occasion, and we too can do great things. When people are desperately clinging to Trump, they have the rights. Martin Luther King said, "You have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt." So when you feel yourself being judgmental of someone because they vote for Trump, just know they're judgmental of you because you don't vote for Trump. Try to find that sweet spot in your heart. You know, at this point, it's really not about talking to people who vote differently than you. Right now, it's about organizing with people who are like you. Right now, it's about going to Marianne 2020 and saying you want to volunteer. Maybe you want to come to Iowa. Go there right now. You can write to Juan Rodriguez, Juan, Juan at Marianne2020.com. I am so grateful to you. I am deeply grateful, and I feel very deeply privileged. I hope we have the money to keep this up until February 3rd. I would like that. I like the idea that people have this opportunity, and I like what I feel in New Hampshire and in Iowa where people get it. And I felt this in South Carolina, and I felt this in Nevada where people get what the larger vision is. They're ready to go. We can have real change if we choose it. To those of you who have supported me, for those of you who have donated, to those of you who have volunteered, I cannot thank you enough. And I'm in this. I'm in this if you're in it. I know we can take this all the way, and if the resources are there, we will take it all the way. And if the resources aren't there, this will have been the greatest privilege of my life, and we'll still continue in whatever way God would have us continue. But for right now, see how you feel. And if you feel, yeah, I want this to continue, please go to Marianne2020.com. Give what you can, and let's take this thing all the way. Thank you so much. God bless you.